when we think of leaders, like admired leaders, it's the emotional, it's those soft skills that are admired, not their engineering technical expertise.
You're listening to the Building a Coaching Culture podcast. If you need to compete and win in the 21st century labor market as an employer of choice, this podcast is for you. Each week, we share leadership development, coaching, and culture development insights from leading experts who are developing world-class cultures in their own organizations. And now, here's your host, J.R. Flatter.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. I'm J.R. Flatter, and I'm your host of Building a Coaching Culture. And as always, I'm here with my co-host, millennial computer scientist, Lucas.
Hello.
And our distinguished guest today is Jill Marshall Annitto. She's a coach extraordinaire and a really good, distinguished guest for us. I'll just remind ourselves and our listeners who our audience is. Leaders of complex organizations who are trying to create a coaching culture to compete and win in the 21st century, especially the labor market. Right? We're in a hyper-competitive labor market. That's not going away anytime soon. So how do you compete and win? And that's why we're here. So Jill, I'll pass the floor to you. We really want you to brag about yourself for a while. So tell us about yourself. Tell us about the business that you have or anything else that comes to mind.
Sure, JR. Thank you. I'm super excited to be here as a guest today on your podcast. And really, going back, I'm thinking back to when I first connected with you and, you and Flatter are all about building coaching cultures. And that really, really aligns with what I do as a person, as my own business and who I am. So I'm an executive leadership coach, and I work with individuals one-on-one as well as with groups and teams. So as an executive coach, I'm also a training facilitator. So I do leadership training as well as teaching other coaches, coaching skills, teaching coaches who are in ICF accredited training programs, such as the one at Flatter. And I also teach managers coaching skills. So very much a part of building a coaching culture in that way. I also work one-on-one with groups of coaches themselves. So as a mentor coach, helping small groups of coaches or individual coaches who are going through coach certification training to really grasp and integrate the concepts that they are learning. And then as a coach supervisor, I am completing my certification in coaching supervision. So that's a whole nother aspect of development for coaches. And I work with coaches at all levels, really helping them to be the best that they can be. And also supervision has a very holistic and I guess strategic approach. So really helping organizations and leaders and making sure that they're getting the most out of coaching and making sure coaches are aligned in organizations, in addition to helping coaches build their practice and deal with challenging situations or opportunities. So they're all different factors that kind of play into this coaching culture.
It sounds like there's a lot going on in your world. I just want to pick up on a couple words, if I could. Training, leaders, managers, groups, individuals. I'll start first with the difference between training and education for you when you're working with these complex organizations.
So I would say training, training is often on very specific skills, and for a brief period of time, whereas education, more longer term, it's more of a program of study. And I think both are really, really critical. As you know, with training, because I was a corporate trainer for years, and I finally, after doing that and seeing the results of training can lose its effectiveness if you don't really integrate what you learn, or if organizations don't integrate, say the leadership that they are teaching. So that's really where organization development and coaching come in, because you can make it real and you need to make it real. And it's much, much broader than just attending a training class.
So if I bring you into my organization to help me build a coaching culture, are you training me? Are you educating me, coaching me? What are we doing together?
So it's all of those and much, much more. I would say there's maybe a consulting approach, or at first, like, where are they now?
Mm.
What is coaching culture mean to them? What do they want to create? There might be an educational component on, well, this is the way we view a coaching culture where, let's say leaders and people at all levels are really empowered to help find solutions and be a part of that, and continuous growth and so forth. So aligning on that can be a first step of, then there might be training for managers on coaching skills. Developing an internal coaching capability can be a component, such as flatters developing internal capabilities within the armed forces,
Hmm.
for their own coaches. And then it could be coaching, using a coaching leadership style and what that means. And there's another training component to that. Of course, this all takes time to build and momentum and so forth.
From that, leadership approach style of, managers that have coaching skills and integrating people with coaching skills into your organization, what makes that distinct from just developing leaders in general? What are the benefits there?
So I think a coaching style or coaching skills is going to really help the leader's team, the direct reports, like, again, find those solutions for themselves to think on their feet, to develop themselves maybe in a more hierarchical organization. Or if a leader does not have those skills, it can be more, I'll tell you what to do. Here's how it is done. Or even if you think of mentoring, which is a great thing, a mentor shares their own experience, shows what they've learned, can be a great help with technical skills, and coaching comes in with more of the soft skills, or critical thinking, and what is motivating to you. How might you approach this problem? What are some potential solutions? So it really opens the door to kind of like much broader, more creative thinking.
So, what do you think are some of the biggest mistakes people make when they bring someone like you into the team?
As I'm thinking from a consulting perspective, and consultants in one regard are supposed to have answers, and that's very true that they can provide suggestions, and ultimately you want to agree on something to implement on a solution. Assuming that, if I go into your organization and I make some assumptions, I know how this organization is run, or I know what you need, and try to fit you into whatever model I'm bringing. It's kind of like fitting a square peg into a round hole.
Hmm.
But if I use a coaching approach within that, and what does success look like, and really pull on those strings, like, what are people thinking, what are they feeling? So there's an emotional component as well. How are they, what are people motivated to do? And then you can work, once you get that ideal situation, you can work backwards from there, see where they're at now, and hopefully use some coaching around that to make sure it's an accurate assessment, and then align those two. So now we have more of a direction. I would say coaching also along the way, because things can change, or you want to have some milestones, and coaching around that can be very helpful as well.
You talk about encouraging critical thinking and problem solving and creativity. Do managers have challenges, or what advice would you give to managers trying to integrate those kind of ideas from, if it's lower levels or just employees that are in different departments, perhaps?
So many of the managers I work with are so busy. So that is a challenge. And, I'd want the hands to take a step back, and really engage with their teams on, what does success look like? What do you understand the problem to be? What do you think gets in the way? Make sure that you're aligned with the direction that you're going, and that you've got this, broader context for it. Why is this important? What is so important about it? How else could we get there? So that you're also encouraging, like, that out of the box thinking versus do it my way, or this is how we've always done it, and just do it that same old way, and you're not likely to get any new results.
I remind everybody that I get a chance to talk to. We're in the 23rd year of the 21st century. So we're leading across multiple generations in a time of rapid and enduring change. Can I be a coach at any of those generations?
think it's critical to have, have coaches at any level, but I would say absolutely yes. Yeah, anyone can develop coaching skills.
And do you coach across generations?
I do. It's interesting because as an executive coach, I tend to coach more senior level leaders. And I enjoy that. I enjoy their kind of that strategic approach to maybe seeing the organization and the environment and where is the organization going. And, sometimes coaches talk about like niching or specializing in one type of leader or, I feel like it's really, really important and also enjoyable. So when I coach new leaders, for instance, new managers, because anyone can be a leader in an organization, sometimes it's a different perspective, and that really really grows me as a coach, and really helps with the more senior folks to know that perspective of the more junior levels. And another challenge is like the at the mid level, where leaders or managers are pulled, from different directions. So I really enjoy all of it, and I think it's critical. I feel like in terms of generations, like newer folks in the workplace, you mentioned this, the workplace, of now and the future, and they're almost demanding more coaching. I feel
Mm.
like they are not, and Lucas, you could probably add to this, but they're not going to be happy with do it my way. Here's how it is done. Go carry out your orders, and without their own, without empowering them to, kind of be a part of this.
So you raised a really amazing point, and I'd love to hear your dig down in on this a little bit. You coach senior leaders. There are senior leaders that I say, you'd benefit from a coach. And they look at me like, I'm already at the top of my career. What possible benefit could I achieve from coaching with Jill? So dig down on that for us for a little bit, please.
Yeah, so I'm going to say that there's a time and place for coaching, and that the leader needs to be open to coaching, and some are not. Absolutely. So, on one hand, maybe educating those leaders about the benefits that coaching provides, as an analogy that's often used is that top athletes are always in coaching or training,
Hmm.
musicians. When you're at the top of your field, you really want that outside perspective. I don't know if that leader in your example wants to grow or learn, or if maybe he or she is, I'm just going to stay where I am, and that's that. So I feel like the interest must be there. But as coaches and for the coaching industry, we can certainly share the benefits. And I've heard success stories too of leaders who have said coaching, this stuff is BS, it doesn't
Hmm.
work, and only to have a huge turnaround when working with a coach that's the right fit, and opening up new perspectives and ideas that they didn't know were possible.
Yeah, we had a cohort 2 weeks ago, and a senior leader came in as a favor to one of the other members of the cohort. And you could see the look on this person's face about, yeah, this is going to be interesting, but I'm not going to learn anything. And within an hour, 2 hours of this 30-hour boot camp, we're blowing his mind. And he walked away a completely different leader.
So I want to ask you, JR, what was it that, is there anything that you can pinpoint in that session that changed this leader's mind?
Yeah, and this is an enduring challenge in our profession. And that is, how do you convince someone of the coaching magic until they've seen it or felt it for themselves? And he felt it for himself. He was being coached in a practice session in group and had real discovery that he never expected. And there it was. He was like, oh, now I get it. And for the rest of the time, thankfully, it happened early. He had 24 hours left of instruction. So he was one of the better, more engaged members of the cohort overall.
An incredible story.
I was thinking from the organizational level, is there some degree of, a huge advantage, like right after a consulting session and then a challenge with sustaining that kind of culture? Or do you do any sort of periodic check-in with these organizations?
So a periodic check-in that is a best practice. That would be the best practice. Absolutely. Having an ongoing relationship, checking in, how are things going at this point? What else could be improved? What else? Yeah, what else is possible? So absolutely, I think check-ins are critical.
Yeah, so one of my favorite books on this subject, I don't know if you've had a chance to read Peter Hawkins' Creating a Coaching Culture. He has a great 7-step model to how one goes about creating that coaching culture. And the first two are two that you already talked about, external coaches and internal coaches. Can you talk about the role and why would I need both, a hybrid approach?
I feel like for senior leaders, it's really critical, especially to have an external perspective. For instance, the coaching that I do for Flatter, for the leaders, they really appreciate the, perspectives from different organizations, from the private sector, for instance, from entrepreneurs and startups. What's going on in that space that I can use? What are you seeing across the federal government? What types of trends? And also, there's the confidentiality aspect. So, if you're at the top of your organization, you want to maintain that confidentiality. And that's a little bit tricky with an internal coach who is a member of that organization. However, internal coaches are a great, great resource as organizations build coaching cultures. If you have a large organization, we can take the Air Force, for example, and you have a certain number of internal coaches. It's likely that you can match those coaches with leaders, at different parts of the organization where they don't know one another and don't have, they're very much outside of their chains of command and are going to be able to add a different perspective. It is still the same organization, and that might be okay at their level, so there's a need depending on each leader's need and what they want to get from coaching. Maybe an external coach is better in that case. However, as we build, in terms of economies of scale and availability of coaching, I think it's really, really great to have a bench of internal coaches that you can use throughout the organization and make coaching available, like ideally at every level. I think back to like on my career, and I just wonder, had I had access to coaching, at various points, things could be so different, or I would be like at a completely different place, or who knows, but I would have been able to broaden my thinking. And I'm thankful that I got coaching at when I did.
Great. Thank you.
From like a practical organizational level, are there some employees that are, higher impact to have those coaching skills versus others?
So ideally, some coaches focus exclusively or predominantly on like high potential employees. And I think that's very, very, that's valuable. I don't want to leave out the others as an advocate of coaching. And I don't know if coaching is right for them or not. However, if everyone has access, there is a time and place for everything. You don't know until you offer it. And maybe those others, your average employee becomes high potential because they're made aware of possibilities that they didn't know about at the time. Yeah, so it could be phenomenal to offer coaching, across the board. And then some, maybe not, it's not their thing, but I think organizations could really, really benefit.
I'm reminded that there are really two coaching roles. And one is the more formal coaching relationships that we've been focused on most of our time here. External formal coaching, internal formal coaching. But really, when we begin to get that coaching culture, it's due to the leaders adopting a coaching style of leadership, which is informal. And so the internal coaches can also help evangelize leading through coaching. But can you talk to us a little bit about how might one do that if I'm a leader and my leadership is telling me we're developing a coaching culture. I want you to lead with a coaching style of leadership. How am I different?
So that's a great question. There is Daniel Goleman, who is, he's very known for emotional intelligence. He has, I'm going to reference this because I use this all the time in working with leaders and on training leadership. He has something called the 6 styles of leadership that are based on emotional intelligence, and a coaching style is one of those styles. We all have default styles. And the best leaders ideally can flex among all of them, depending on the situation, depending on the circumstances. So to help a leader build a coaching style, first, there is maybe a training component on what a coaching style is, but basically, as we have discussed, you are developing your staff through coaching, through asking these powerful open-ended questions. What is important about this? What are the potential obstacles and so forth? And helping them to do that thinking and developing along the way. So building in those skills for the leader. And also there is the timing component. I mean, most of them can figure this out, but it's like, at what point can you fit that in? And I often hear it, well, it takes time. So really making the time for those types of conversations, getting to know what motivates your team, for instance, getting to know them on a personal and professional basis, and something about their families, their lives, like really what is important to them is really, really critical for that to succeed. And again, it is one style. So in terms of, if there's a crisis going on, I'm not going to say, hey, Lucas, let's sit down and tell me which door you think we should leave from when the building is on fire. It's, of course, it's a very simplistic example, but building then into all styles, and wherever you can use that, having that available to you, I would say it can be huge for developing teams within organizations and developing the organizations themselves.
So we talk about, sometimes other guests will bring up like that familiar aspect that you did, where it's like, what is important to this individual? And, let's talk about their life outside of work and all of that. Is that kind of a side effect and like a happy benefit of the coaching culture? Or is that something that you have to deliberately create?
I think it depends on what the organizational culture is currently, because maybe it is very task oriented. Hopefully, in this day and age, and as we move forward with leadership leading the future organizations, that is key. And then some people, I'm going to say, are less, want to share less about their personal lives, or some leaders are less comfortable asking that. And I think that there is a balance. But regardless, at least knowing something about your team, about your employees, where they are coming from on a personal level is really, really critical, because it's a whole person. We're all whole people, and we show up at work. And I always say to my clients too, that in life is like fair game for coaching, because if you're going through a divorce, or even if you have a fight with your spouse, and you come to work and have to lead a big meeting, that home life is, it's going to affect the way you show up. Yeah, getting that balance, I guess, is a common topic with leaders who I coach. Some are not less comfortable with it than others.
When I engage with you, how does it mature? How does it end? How do we know we're done?
Also, great questions. At day one, I like to do what's called a discovery session. So it's, I really, really want to know all about you, JR. And there will be a personal component to this. At least I will, I often provide a list of questions in advance for the leader to think through, to consider, to reflect upon. They can complete that if they want or not. And some of them are organizational, what are your goals for the coaching engagement? Where do you want to be if we're scheduled to wrap up in 9 months or a year? What do you want to be different at that point? So you may or may not know the answers to this, but it's a starting point for me to really get to know you, what motivates you, something about whatever you're willing to share about your personal life, your work life, including what are you afraid of? What keeps you up at night? What are your strengths and successes? What do you want to build on? So that would be like day one, and possibly part of, even leading into the second session, we might be building on those things. What are your values? What is most important to you? So ideally, we identify some goals or outcomes for our coaching engagement over time to work on. And some leaders are like very much like whatever shows up, whatever you can coach to, whatever shows up in the moment. I find that it can be helpful to have an idea, like what would you like to be different? And that can change over time. So then we progress, and you come to the sessions. You as the leader always, it's your session. So you can change the topic. You don't have to follow this long range plan. If something else pops up, usually there are themes throughout. And as the coach, I follow those high level themes and what I notice about you to help you build awareness. Because a coach is somewhat like a mirror, in terms of I can help a leader see things that might be too close to them for them to see. There is a natural wrap up point often And that may or may not be at the end of the 9 or 10 months or whatever we've agreed upon. It's kind of like we're not following up on them, maybe those big issues, and the leader is in a really, really good place. And that might be a wrap up, and so I would have a conversation with the leader about that, sharing my observations and asking for his or hers. Where are you now? Are there additional items to explore? Sometimes it ends too soon if you only have a limited number of sessions. So then you might recommend starting an engagement down the road. I've had leaders who I've coached, 5 years ago over a period of time. And then they come back to me and they're like, hey, Jill, some things popped up that I want to explore via coaching. So it can be this great ongoing relationship. And again, that getting back to that time and place, if you're in a really good place and working on executing these goals, and maybe you don't, need a coach as much. So having said that too, I'm an advocate for always having a coach, and that can be helpful. I have other leaders who I check in with, 30 minutes, 20 minutes. We have a brief check-in. They like to update me on what's going on their progress, and that could be it. A coach can be a very good sounding board for senior leaders who don't get to, discuss things with other people at their level, or peers, or colleagues.
So I know just from my own experience that, if you try to implement a change in an organization, some people can have an emotional reaction, like they want to reject the change, or they just feel like almost like a bruised ego effect. Can you talk about those challenges and how you've experienced, like how you've worked through them?
The organization, it wants to make a change, and maybe not everyone is aligned, or some people, it sounds like you said bruised ego, and I'm thinking that maybe there's some emotions there, maybe some, even fear of the change, because as humans, we can naturally fear change.
Mm-hmm.
Or am I tracking?
Yeah, exactly.
Your question?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, that's another common topic, I think, is organizational change, and how do you coach your team, or how do you approach that? And I do at times with that, because there are, some known best practices with that, such as, communicating often, even when there's nothing to communicate. That's a message if you don't communicate, status of a change. So how you approach communication, I think a leader needs to meet individually, connecting one-on-one with the team. Like, how do you feel about this change? What are your thoughts? What are you afraid might happen? Maybe not in those words, but there's often a fear, like loss of my job or loss of my role or something. So the best you can address that, or help the leader reassure, or at least, provide the, what the current status is. If it's not good news, like that can really help reassure their team. So definitely a lot more one-on-one coaching, as well as, communicating as often as possible on the status of the change.
Yeah, I don't know if our listeners or viewers saw you put your coaching hat on a minute ago, but that was a very coach-like question you asked, Lucas. We saw that. So if I think I need coaching and I need a coaching culture and I need you to come help me, what should I be reading before you get here?
I think there's an overwhelming amount of literature out there on this topic, and maybe coaching culture means different things to different people. I often hear, for example, coaching and mentoring, that if leaders don't know specifically about that, a coach is not going to tell you what to do, they can confuse it with a mentor, because both are critical roles and very complementary. So I think, JR, I would advise a conversation at 1st. Hey, I'm thinking about this.
Okay.
What do you think? What can you perhaps share, or, what would be what might I do next to find out more?
Well, I was curious. You mentioned Goldman a few minutes ago. I just wondered if there was another go-to book that you recommend to your customers and leaders.
So I recommend The Coaching Habit by Michael
Bungay Stainer. Yeah.
Yep. I've got it.
That's your,
Thank you.
Oh, you got yours? I'll grab mine.
Yep. I've got mine on my bookshelf behind me.
I've got the advice chart. Here it is.
Yeah.
I knew it couldn't be too far away.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, the coaching habit. Yeah.
Yeah.
That is one I recommend almost all the time. It's, that is like step one at building that coaching leadership style, his questions. And
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
it's a great, great
Oh, I
resource.
use it all the time. I cite him every time though.
I've seen him in your training materials
Yeah. Yeah.
too. I
Yeah.
love it.
So if I'm a healthy person and I'm feeling really good and somebody said, "Oh, when's the last time you went to the doctor?" I might be like, "Oh, I don't need to, I feel great." Are there organizations that kind of have that mindset, and how would you pitch a coaching culture to an organization that feels like they have it all together?
Yes, and that's a hard one. I'm wondering now with this organization, what's on the horizon for them? What challenges they might not even see that are out there. Moving forward, coaching can definitely help with that. So I feel like in today's environment, there is no, I'm good, I don't need anything else. Similar to the leader that JR mentioned, the senior leader, I'm good, I don't need anything else. Well, then you can stay put where you are, but the world is going to pass you by. That's where I would challenge them. What do you not know
Mm.
that's out there?
So we get a lot of feedback as a byproduct of who some of our customers are. And I get feedback on you. So I know you're killing it out there as a coach. Tell us one of your success stories. You keep it confidential, obviously, but tell us one of the ones that you brag about. And that'll show our listeners some of the magic.
So I think that's a really, really hard question, and got me starting to think about it. Which, speaking of coaching, then I'm focusing on myself and not on the conversation. One that comes to mind, since I do work with the Army, with the Air Force, so with the armed forces in general, as well as with the foreign service community, and this also applies in the corporate sector. So I'm thinking of a type of leader, and maybe a military leader is a good one because this can be more extreme. So some folks who are not big on emotional intelligence, they are not big. They don't want to share their emotions because they have succeeded by not sharing them. They're in front of a unit giving orders or leading, some really, really big initiatives in a hierarchical organization, or they have just due to the type of their role. And a lot of them are like engineers, or they're, kind of more technically skilled. So getting them to embrace emotional intelligence and the different aspects of being emotionally aware. How do you, awareness of their own emotions, awareness of the emotions on their team, or other people's emotions. So building like empathy and being compassionate, but also being a strong leader. As this, former special forces guy or whatever, like you're used to showing up in a certain way, and how do you connect on that emotional level? And by doing so, that's going to make you so, a much, much stronger leader. And it's going to, you're really going to engage people when you can bridge that. So I think when they start to become aware, and it's really, really cool. Like some of them will start reading Brene Brown, which is another resource.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Or I just love it. I have a client who's in Iraq right now, deployed, and he's helping, working to engage his folks. All right, yes, turn a lead, awesome. He's sharing with his reading list, and talking about these things with his spouse, and really it's hard, but how do you embrace it? And they're really, really dedicated to kind of understanding the importance of it, and to, kind of bridging that gap. Because as we all know, when we think of leaders, like admired leaders, it's the emotional, it's those soft skills that are admired, not their engineering technical expertise. So to be a really, really great leader, and I see general officers at this level, or CEOs at this level, who do this well.
So the other day, one of my buddies, he was giving me a hard time. He's like, everything is related to running with you. And he was like joking about it. Like, I think that's kind of my thing. Like everything's a running analogy. So from your own perspective, Jill, and your hobbies or anything outside of your professional life, is there anything like that you relate to leadership and coaching in a way?
So interesting that you mentioned running, because for years I was a distance runner, and I love it. Definitely the sports metaphors help. I would say currently, even today, I don't run as much, but I do a lot of hiking, and I love adventure travel. So I love to be in really remote places. I took a trip to Patagonia where it was like so, so remote. but it was also really, really physically challenging in terms of the hikes that we did each day. And like, we didn't see anyone outside of our groups. So kind of like, I believe like coaching is similar, or like overcoming these obstacles and persevering. And that's similar to life, that it's never a straight line. There are ups and downs. And, and how do you persevere? How do you build your resilience? How do you continue moving forward? How do you step back and see the larger picture, of keeping your eye on that goal or something?
Yeah. Me and my dad, JR, we both are big runners. And I think it had just taught me a lot about, incremental progress towards your goals, like you were talking about, and just being able to feel that reward.
Yes, incremental, like absolutely. Sometimes it feels like you're not making any progress.
At the pace I run now, running teaches me patience. Because when I go for a long run now, it isn't mileage, it's in hours. So my last question, because Lucas always gets the last one. So you could take your coaching hat off if you would. So personally, professionally, what advice would you have given yourself 5 years ago, knowing what you know now?
Speaking of patience, building on your comments there, I think to be patient. So 5 years ago, I was in the early stages of, I went out, I left a high profile job at Booz Allen to launch my coaching business. And this was actually after attending my first coaching session. It was session 1. It was like a weekend thing. And I guess I always knew I wanted to be out on my own, and ended up leaving to pursue this rather abruptly. In hindsight, it probably would have maybe stayed on part-time, but it worked out. So I think to have patience, and also to focus, what you focus on grows would have been another area of advice. So when I first left, I was, I am employed, and I don't have the luxury of, another retirement or something to support me. So this is my income, and, to grow my coaching practice. I guess I was like, I get sidetracked by bright, shiny objects. And I'm like, oh, let's do some of this and that. And some of them were like, all within the broader talent development fields. But, developing training on safety for the Navy is a great thing, but it's like, it wasn't related to my coaching. So the pandemic came around, I really, really focused on coaching and one-on-one, and building that practice. And now I'm doing everything coaching culture related. And I feel like I've hit my stride here.
So yeah, my last question is just going to be a follow-up on that. We've talked a lot about, why coaching is good in general, but personally, what satisfaction do you get out of it, and what made you want to leave your former position for it?
So what satisfaction, I guess, probably similar to all coaches, helping others develop is huge. It's really, really huge for me. And doing it in as a coach versus as a trainer, it's just so much more effective when, a leader is coming up with these things by themselves, and seeing that progress, and seeing the progress in organizations is what drives me, to want to do this full time. And you got a second question, and I forgot.
No, pretty much just that. Like, what drives you and what motivates you?
Absolutely. My whole career has been, developing leaders and teams. However, different aspects of it, and I just feel like the coaching culture aspect is where it's at versus training or it's just a really, really good place. And I can get so into this that I need to balance my own personal life, and give time to my family, and to make time for vacation and all of that, because I just love it so much.
Well, great. I think that's a great few minutes together. So thank you for that.
Yes. Thank you again, JR and Lucas. No, this has been awesome to come on the show and talk about coaching.
Well, that concludes this episode of Building a Coaching Culture. I truly hope that this episode was helpful to you. If it was, be sure to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. Maybe stop and give us a rating or a review, and share this podcast with someone who might find it helpful as well. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.